Hello and welcome to another episode of Back to Britpop. It's me, Chris. On this episode, I am delighted to be joined by Astrid Williamson of the band Goya Dress. Really enjoyed this interview. Astrid goes into great detail about her formative years, her musical influences and the songwriting process for her. We talk about Goya Dress and all her solo albums that she's been producing. She has a new album coming out next year and a single coming out in a couple of weeks, and we talk a bit about that. And there's also some live dates coming as well. As per usual, I'll be back at the end of the interview to talk about all the ways that you can support this podcast, but I'll stop waffling and hand over to Astrid. Welcome to the podcast, Astrid. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Whereabouts in the country are you?
Well, this second, I'm actually up in Derbyshire. My mum is up here, and during the pandemic, it's been hard because she's in a care home. So I've been trying to have as much access. I was actually involved in quite a lot of campaigning to do with access and so forth during the pandemic, because that's still very difficult. That aspect of the situation is not ideal. So I've been spending as much time up here as I can, really. I'm actually based in Brighton most of the time. I've been in Brighton a long time, and so I still live there too. So it's kind of, obviously the music business has been completely put on hold, so it's not so drastic to be going between two places, because all my other work keeps getting bumped to next year. So I feel it's actually one of the blessings is that I have a lot of time to be with her.
Have you found that stifling of your kind of, your day-to-day business? Has it been difficult for you to deal with, or have you just sort of been rolling with it?
Honestly, it's not been that different for me. I've never been much of a out and about crazy party animal. I've always been in, very often writing or working on music. I'm just one of those slightly hibernatory creatures a lot of the time. I mean, I like a party with the best of them. It's just, I didn't find lockdown that different to normal. I mean, obviously when I'm on tour, it's very different, but I didn't find it that different, to be perfectly truthful.
When did it all start for you, Astrid, in terms of just getting into music and becoming a songwriter?
Well, music itself was really my mother in her working life was a piano teacher, and she studied singing and piano, and that was her career as a teacher. And my dad was a self-taught banjo player and guitarist, and he can pretty much pick up any instrument and play it completely self-taught. So I had really two quite strong strains, and they played a lot together when we were little kids of parties. And my mum, who has a beautiful voice, she would sing songs like Plaisir d'amour, and be quite sophisticated actually. And my dad would accompany her, and they would sing together, and it was wonderful, really, for me. I remember my dad had a banjo case that was fur-lined with a spectacular orange fur, and I really quite literally wanted to live inside his banjo case because I loved the way it felt so much. I was very little because I could fit in this banjo case. So there was certainly no taboo about being a musician or wanting to be a musician. I mean, they both wanted me to do something a bit more sensible, I think. I don't think they loved the idea that I was going to go off and do music, but I did go and get a degree. I went to the academy, and my mum went there, so I kind of followed in her footsteps. So music is a background and as a backdrop. It was always there. There was lots of music in the house. Singing was encouraged. We were kind of shoved on the stage, and my sister completely rebelled and said, I'm not going to be anybody's performing monkey. But I loved it, and I kind of took to it and never had any doubts about the fact that music seemed to be important. And also the Shetland Folk Festival was started by my stepfather and a few other people in Shetland. I think 1980 was the very first Shetland Folk Festival, and we were, because my stepfather, who actually came from Liverpool, he was a real kind of Beatles fan and a folk music fan, but he was part of that generation of Liverpudlians that came up with the Beatles and was massively impacted by music. And we were the kind of opening act, because my mum sang, my parents were divorced by then, and she was with my stepfather at that point, and we were in a band, and we opened the very first Shetland Folk Festival. And I remember going to school. I would have been in secondary 2 in that in 1980, like second year of high school. And I remember going to my teacher, my gym teacher, and saying, I simply can't do basketball today because I'm performing tonight. So I'm exempting myself. I didn't even feel the need to have a conversation. It was like, I'm a professional musician this evening, and nobody's going to make me go and do PE today. And I felt completely entitled to, this was my job now.
Yeah.
And I think that might have been pivotal for the whole job description thing about working at night. And yeah, so that was basically kind of music is a viable journey, a road to travel down maybe. And then I did go to music college, and I was doing piano and composition as my first studies and second studies. And then I got into a relationship in my second year, and my boyfriend was in a rock band. He was a wonderful guitarist, and he was doing the whole getting a deal thing, and lots of record companies everywhere. And there was a great big buzz around his band, and it never actually amounted to the career that I certainly felt he deserved. He'd already been doing guitarist for the British Consul a lot as a solo guitarist, doing classical sort of his own compositions. But anyway, this was rock music, and I suddenly thought, I mean, it just was a real eye-opener. I thought, my God, this is fantastic. It's really exciting. And I wrote Katie Stood in the Benches one night, just, kind of arrived fairly fully formed, and that was that really. And I thought, wow, this is what I want to do now. I'd been doing a tremendous amount of practicing, because I was doing piano and I was playing like 4 hours practice a day, and Bach and Beethoven, Mozart and everything. And I did love that, but I never had the hands for Liszt or Rachmaninoff, really. My hands weren't big enough. And I just didn't have the technique. I was never going to make it as a classical, certainly not as a solo pianist. But even I think as a pianist generally, I don't think I had the love for the repertoire really. So when I discovered songwriting, and I realized that it sort of came, I mean, Katie Stood in the Benches was on the debut rooms, Goya Dress's debut rooms, and I didn't really go through a lot of trying to write songs. I just wrote a song, and that was really how it arrived in my experience. I didn't think about it after that. I thought, I definitely want to do this. Also, it felt quite easy.
Well, that's. I mean, it's rare, isn't it? Sometimes to sort of have the confidence or the songs to come as fully formed as they do. But did you find yourself writing more on guitar or piano, or what was the instrument of kind of choice for that?
Well, actually, even though Katie Stood in the Benches was written on the piano, I borrowed a guitar. I think Anton gave me a guitar, or I borrowed a guitar for a while, and I borrowed an amp when I moved to London eventually. But initially, I had an electric guitar, and I wrote all the early Goya Dress songs prior to actually moving to London. I had a raft of songs that I kept them to myself, really. I didn't want anybody else to. Initially, I was playing with Anton, but I think I was quite possessive of these early songs, Strange Death and Valentina, and all the songs that came out on the Goya Dress EPs. A lot of them were written on guitars, because what I found is because I was so rubbish at guitar. I mean, I wasn't terrible at guitar, because my dad had taught me some chords so as I could accompany him on the banjo. So I knew my way around about 4 or 5 chords: E minor, G, A minor, D, C. I could play all those chords because those were the chords that he needed for me to play.
I didn't know there were any more chords than that. That's all you need, surely.
Well, actually, I know there are more, but I don't know what they're called on the guitar.
Me neither.
I know I use more, but I haven't a clue what they are. No, because my facility on guitar was quite limited, it actually had a huge impact on what I was writing because you simply have to compare. If you compare a song like Katie Stood in the Benches, which has got a bunch of chords in it, loads of chords in it, because I'm able to do a lot more on the piano than I am on the guitar. I wouldn't know where to begin to play that song on the guitar. In a song like maybe Valentina, which is all in E minor, they're very different harmonically because of that. Because I just simply didn't have the chops on the guitar to do something really complicated. But I like that, and I don't mind that. I never wanted to be a solo lead guitarist ever. It was never I did love rock and roll, and I loved a lot of heavy metal bands. In Shetland, we were brought up on, I don't know, AC/DC and Led Zeppelin and big heavy rock bands. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed, especially Led Zeppelin. It wasn't my ambition to do that. It didn't matter to me. Being a songwriter was probably, if I had ambition, it was to be a really good songwriter.
So you had this kind of these songs written, formed as in some way, and it's what made you take the next step to sort of get a band together?
Well, firstly, I'd been in Glasgow. I studied in Glasgow at the RSAMD, which is, I think they call it the Royal Conservatoire now of Scotland. And I was there, and after a couple of years working in bands and learning how to be in bands, actually, I learned everything I knew from working with Anton Kirkpatrick. And so I went to London about 2 years into that. I went to London in March of 1993, and I had the name because I wanted to call the band Goya Dress, because I used to be quite slippery about this. I would say it was a Spanish festival, because there is a festival that is called Goya something dress. Maybe, I don't know. There is something that pertains to that, and it's quite plausible. But actually, Goya Dress is from a dress that Fleur Forsyth wore in the Forsyth saga, which had been, I didn't have a TV when I was living in a gatehouse in Ayrshire with my boyfriend, because there was a place we could rehearse downstairs. It was a big gatehouse in this country estate that had been put up for auction because of the death duties. And we could rehearse there, and there was no TV. And so I just listened to radio all the time. And there was a serialization of John Goldsworthy's Forsyth saga on.
Okay.
I fell in love with that, and I just loved it. The romance of a dress that a woman would wear that reminded her lover of a Goya painting, and further after that was called her Goya Dress. And I just really liked it. I really liked the idea of it, and I don't know why I was so. I guess I thought maybe, especially in the early 90s, to be into turn of the century English literature just wasn't the most glamorous and exciting thing. I'm sure that's why I didn't own to it at the time. Me of faint heart, but that's where the name came from. So I had the name, and I don't know how many songs, probably about 6, maybe 6 or 7. Valentina, Strange Death, Katie. Which other songs? There were Glorious. I wrote in London and I went to London. I looked around for players, and I knew one person who lived in London who'd been at the academy, a guy called Mark Crooks, who's a clarinetist. And I rang him up and said, "Oh, I'm trying to get a band together. Do you know anybody?" He said, "Yes, I know the best drummer in London." I thought, yes, that'll do. Best drummer in London. That's who I want. And a guy called Simon Pearson. And Simon is just an amazing drummer. And in my opinion, definitely the best drummer in London. Then and now. And then I had a couple of bass players. And one guy stayed for a little while. Like we didn't do any gigs. We just did some rehearsals. And he was a friend of Simon's. And he was great. But he said, "Listen, I've got a job on a cruise or something, but I know this girl called Terry DeCastro." And I just thought, the minute I heard her name, I thought, that's the right person. She's the right person. And she always talks about how her flatmate came back and said, "Oh, there's this girl who's rung twice, and she's determined. She's absolutely desperate to talk to you. She won't stop ringing. And it was the funniest thing because it was like I was really intuitively like, yes, that's the right person. She's a bass player and she's a girl, even better. I guess I arrived in London in 1993, about March, and I think by the end of the summer, I found Terry and Simon. Simon first and then Terry. And I think we were rehearsing by the end of the year. I think that round about the end of the year we'd got together and we used to work at the premises all the time down in Hackney Road. Was it Hackney Road, the premises? Anyway, yeah, so it was so exciting and fun. It was a lovely time.
When did you sort of start to do live performances with this lineup, and did you have like a plan of kind of what you wanted to do and where to take this Goya Dress?
Well, the funny thing is, those 2 years I spent kind of learning how to be in rock bands with Anton. I'd also been, because I didn't write for that band. I was writing songs, but they were kind of being. I wanted to keep them. It's not like I had a grand plan. They just felt very precious to me, you know. I felt like I had to protect them until I felt they were ready for the work to be taken out. I really did, but because I had a lot of energy, basically I was kind of managing things a little bit. Like I was the one that was organised enough to get demo tapes and biogs and photos and write it, because back in the day you did everything, you know, by the post.
Yeah.
So we put out envelopes after envelope, and I knew a lot of people. Before I came to London, I'd knocked on a lot of doors to try and, you know, just get contacts and talk to people. And so I didn't know people per se. I didn't have friends, but I did know who to send stuff to. I knew who to send stuff at 4AD or at various record companies. I'd had enough contact with sending out demo tapes, you know, before then for Anton to sort of know how to do it. So I knew that I had to get a demo tape together, and I had a little 4-track recorder, and me and Terry and Simon, we would go into a rehearsal space and we'd record the drums and maybe the bass, and that would be 2 tracks, and then I'd bounce them down to 1 and then bounce over maybe the guitar and then bounce that into the 3rd track. It was all bounce, 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 bounce. Yeah. So I had a really scrappy demo tape with King Thong, Strange Death, Katie, and I think I can't remember, Valentina maybe. And we made those demo tapes in just rehearsal studios. But I knew that if it was good enough and just a reasonable, just a little bit of a biog, and I think we had a friend of ours took a photograph. I think I did know what to do, actually. And I think I did it all in one moment as well. I waited, and so that everybody got it at the same time. So our first show was at the Samuel Beckett down in Stoke Newington. And I think there's a tremendous amount of record company interest for that. We did 6 shows before. We only did 6 shows before we got signed.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, so, and it happened within about 6 weeks. So, well, not 6 weeks, but I think we'd said yes after about 2 months and 6 shows. And it was just incredibly fast. We were on tour with Suede in October of the same year. We did our first gig in May. So our trajectory was incredibly fast. Me and Terry would run around saying, "Whose life? Whose life?" And we call it a taxi life because things got so mad that we had to take taxis. And we said, "Oh, we're in our taxi life now."
And with Nude then, because I mean that they're the label you signed with. Was there any real kind of reason for that, or were they just the best fit, do you think, for you?
There was a lot of talk. I think that there was a real sense that the majors that wanted to sign, I think Epic was one of the majors. Certainly a bigger Sony. Nude was still a Sony label, but it was independent. I think it was a lot to do with management as well, saying that they felt that an independent would be more likely to give us developmental time. Perhaps that was, and also it was a good deal. It was enough money that I believe that quite quickly, although we all had jobs. And I did keep a lot. I had an interesting job. I played the piano at the Groucho Club, and I enjoyed my job.
Ah,
So I didn't give it until I absolutely couldn't tour and do my job, because I kind of enjoyed playing the piano for a living. We all had jobs, but the deal did enable us to give ourselves a little bit of wages, which was quite luxurious, I think. Certainly compared with today it is. Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons. It felt like the right fit.
how were the conversations about, getting the album down and getting a producer in? And because you had John Cowell from the Velvet Underground do that whole process of picking a producer, how does that manifest itself? How do you get the opportunity to sort of work with these people?
How did John Cale come on? That's a really good question. I do remember what he said, though. And he said, as long as I get to do Glorious.
Ah.
That because Glorious was on the demo that he got. Do you know something? I actually don't know who. It might have been Sarah. Sarah Withers was one of the managers. There was two managers. Nick Moore, who ran the Splash Club down at Water Rats, and Sarah Withers, and she had been involved with Sade. I know Glorious was very important to him, but I can't quite remember what part of the connection was that got him involved, or where he'd heard it from. But he definitely was very decided about that. I think there was real desire on both sides for it to move forward.
What was he like to work with, and what was that sort of recording process for that album like?
Well, we were up at Battery in Kilburn, and we had a 6-week session, I think, for all of it. I think recording and mixing in 6 weeks.
Okay.
I feel like it was, because I feel like that would be plenty of time to make a record. The turning point for me, because I was a perfectionist and a control freak.
Okay.
Really, I mean, I'm still quite bad, but I was particularly bad when I was younger. And it was very hard for me to let go. And I was writing all the string parts and the instrumentation for most of it. And I was really, really controlling about it. And I really needed it to be a certain way. And we had, John would go a bit too fast for me. I'd kind of be trying to slow him down. I just felt I kept feeling him slipping out of my control. And we would fight about a few things. But one day, the Brodsky Quartet came in. Now, they're not credited because I think it was a cash job. I probably shouldn't even say it. But on Kate Sitting the Benches, it was the Brodsky Quartet that came in and did the arrangement. They came in and played the arrangement that I'd written. And I'd written this arrangement for a quartet, and actually it was handwritten on score, because none of the Sibelius and all these technologies didn't exist then, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was handwritten scores that I'd done for the musicians, and the only person that could run that session was me. And so I had to take charge of the whole session with the strings and everything. And after that, John slowed down for me. He would be a bit more. He wasn't quite so. I mean, he definitely wasn't a bully, but he was very strong, and in the sense that you didn't really want to go up against him. And I remember once, I didn't actually like the vocal on Katie Stood in the Benches very much, and me and Martin Brass came in early. I said, Martin, I want to try and redo the vocal, and it wasn't done to a click. It was never going to happen. I said, I really want to try and do this vocal again. I don't like it. And so we sneaked in early, and John came in and he caught me. I remember seeing him through the glass and thought, oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
And but he just sort of threw his arms wide, and he always said, oh, you remind me of Nico and all this stuff. It was quite flattering. And he said, oh, Astrid, you wouldn't be you if you didn't do these things. It was great in so many ways, but I mean, a lot of it was, I did feel like there was a few things that I wanted a certain way, and he literally just did what he wanted. And that was okay, because there's a little bit of a backing vocal on one of the tracks that I was determined to have it my way. And in the end, he just split it was all done on tape, and he just moved the vocal. But it is actually better, so he made a good decision. But great, it was very exciting.
What was it like taking the album and the EPs and all that material out on the road and touring? Did you
Well, I
enjoy that
was
process?
honestly, one of the reasons I had to stop playing the electric guitar was just I found that the volume just I just kind of I just wasn't I'm just not made for it's just too really loud electric guitar. And I remember doing all the guitars and things like for Scorch and stuff, which is you're in a room with two massive amps and it's really, really loud. And there was a part of me that said, I felt it's not that you feel like a fraud. Well, I did feel like a fraud as a guitarist because I'm really not a guitarist in that respect, I think. And I found it just overwhelmingly hard to deal with all that volume all the time. It's like, a real guitarist is born to that. They love it. They live and breathe it, and it's why
Mm.
they do it. We did a lot of overdubs, so it was quite hard to recreate it well. And the fact that, not being a brilliant guitarist, it was hard. And Anton Kirkpatrick came in to help and do, but it kind of changed it a lot. I loved him. He's amazing, amazing guitarist, brilliant guitarist. But it changed it again and made it a bit more rocky. And there's a kind of there's a sort of a quality to the early stuff where I was the only guitarist playing. I mean, Anton only played live, but to recreate what I'd done in the studio, I needed help live. So I found it a struggle trying to do. I was always worried about that. I
Yeah.
was always worried about getting the live experience to be as good as the music that was created in the studio. I was always very conflicted about it, to be honest.
Goya Dress is such a small part such a large and expansive kind of musical career, but it obviously has it paved the way for you in a way. I'm guessing, but after you kind of called it a day with Goya Dress, or decided to sort of end that project, you've gone from strength to strength with these solo recordings and solo albums. And I wanted to ask you how that felt to make that transition from obviously working with a band, a trio or a threesome, and then going into something that was quite insular, maybe. And did you find that quite a difficult transition?
I think it's a huge regret of my life that I wasn't strong enough. Because the album Boyfriend really should have been a Goya Dress record, and Goya Dress were in New Orleans. Terry and all those songs were being rehearsed for a Goya Dress record, and it was just the label, lots of things, and I really would not like to lay the blame anywhere except at my own feet. It's my band, my choice. Because of probably a little bit because of Britpop, we were so musically out of step with that. And so the record company kind of felt that because I was the writer, perhaps if I went solo, blah, 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 we'd still all go to New Orleans, we'd still all be a band, we could all keep our jobs.
Mm.
Nothing would change except the name. And then, you know what? I should have just been stronger. I blame myself. The fact that Boy for You didn't really, I think it's a really good album. And the songs were very strong on that record. But it's really true. I think that what you hear on those early EPs, I really didn't give a damn about anybody else's opinion. I think I got quite affected by this. Oh, you've got to have a hit. Oh, Britpop, or you're right. You've got to write. You got to do something else. And I should have
Yeah, yeah,
just. I think I should have just stuck to my guns and kept writing about blood and death and sex and all these
yeah.
subjects like King Thong and I don't know Scorch, Ruby. It's all dark, dark, dark material. But that's not true either. I did stop writing about those dark, dark things, and that's not the worst thing to happen either.
You've released 6 solo albums.
Yeah, how many is it? Yes, you're right. 6. Is it 6?
Yeah, I hope so. So I counted them.
I get confused sometimes because I always think I always think of Rooms as my first album, but of course it's not a solo album. But yes, and of course the Requiem is a classical album, so that doesn't count in the same way either. But yes, I think you're right, Boyfriend. I think it is 6.
And I wanted to ask you, kind of, how do you think your writings evolved over that sort of landscape of music?
Well, when I talk to you about the subject matter, when I think about how I wrote at the beginning, it was all in the third person, and We used to have a running joke. We'd say, "Who is she anyway?" Me and Terry would laugh about this. But she does this and she does that. Valentina. Um, and I was really conscious not to. I mean, oftentimes I really wasn't singing about myself, but I was quite conscious about that whole thing. And then I went through a long phase of, I think it's that sublimation of your own. I mean, I do think the confessional variety of songwriting can be quite a healing kind of modality. I think that's what it does. I think it draws out. I certainly didn't think a song was worth much if it didn't make me feel quite intensely. And with that, usually, it sounds a bit odd, but slightly ecstatic. The tears weren't tears of sadness; they were kind of this ecstatic feeling.
Mm.
And if I didn't have that, I thought this song's no good. This song's no good. And so I went through a long phase of that. And then We Go to Dream is the last solo album I did. And there's a song on it called Scattered, which is just for me, of all the love songs I've ever written, or songs about heartbreak and loss and grief, I just thought I definitely don't want to write that song again. That's it for me. I'm not writing any more love songs. That's it. It's finished. Done. Don't need to do any more. And I just, I think I'm the variety songwriter that uses it in order to exorcise something.
Yeah.
Now, I do write about other subject matter, like, Boy For You, the track from this first solo album. I read The Collector by John Fowles, and it was just all about a kidnapper, really. It's nothing to do with me or my life. And it's just, you can do that. It's perfectly, that's, I don't know. I think you can totally write stories. Still fairly dark though.
Yeah.
But my journey, the last album that will be released next February, which is called Into the Mountain, that was a completely different writing process and really, really frightening for me because I'm so secure in writing songs that are layered within the lyrics. There has to be some kind of little bit of depth somewhere, some poetry or something to make it a bit more than just something banal.
Yeah.
I like that. That's how I write. It's what I enjoy. And I don't do other satire or anything like that. I just do what I do, and that's what I enjoy. So I did do a completely different experimental. The next album is quite experimental from a writing standpoint, which I'm slightly frightened about because normally I would craft a lot to make sure it stood up, I had to sit and improvise with some text that I had found in a folder that was called Into the Mountain. And I had to come up with something. And once I'd come up with something, I was going to hit record and I was going to not stray very far from it and see how true I could stay to that rather than falling back on how I normally had been writing songs for, good grief, probably 30 years. So it's an experiment, but you know what? I'm entitled to an experiment now.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, after 6 solo albums, yeah, I think you well earned it. And so the new single's out in a couple of weeks.
Yes, in gratitude. Gratitude. I know, I didn't think of that when I realized
that. and you're planning some live dates as well in November?
Yes, I have London. The date in London is the 22nd at the Green Note of November, 24th at the Pier Hat in Manchester, and the 28th, which is actually my birthday, which is the Day of the Lone Wolf. For those of you that do know anything about my solo records, there's one called The Day of the Lone Wolf. And I'll be in the Kitchen Garden in Birmingham that night. That's a Sunday night in November.
Are you taking a band with you, or will this be solo?
I'm hoping to at least have Martin Barker, who played drums on the album. He said he would definitely do the album launch, but I think the album's coming out on the 18th of February next year. And I think that we might do downstairs at the Green Note in November, but do upstairs in March or February, March. And so I might save the actual album I might just save up all my musician credit for the album launch.
Yeah.
But I would really like. I mean, I've just during lockdown, I helped my little brother's writes beautiful songs, so I recorded and produced his album, and he's going to be support for me. So I might rope him in to doing a bit of guitar playing for me. So I'll have him, and maybe Richard Yale, who's played bass for me for years and years, is wonderful, and he's always up for it. So with a little luck, I might be able to do more than just the solo thing. But certainly for the launch next year, I would really hope to put some kind of band together to express the music. Because as usual, I mean, right from the start, it was always fairly layered and for want of a better word, complex. You know, the strings often, and various instrumentation, and so it's something that I've always wanted to have a band if I can, but it's quite an ask these days, taking that out.
Well, I say, this podcast has been an absolute eye opener, and in terms of the music that you've been producing, it's been great the last month or so, since you've agreed to come on and do this with me. Just finding out about everything that you've been doing and listening to an awful lot of your stuff, and it's
thank you.
And sublime is a word I'd use, and I love some of the organic sounding sort of piano tracks that you do, where you can hear the pedals moving, and just it's just lovely stuff. And thank you so much, Astrid, for coming on. It's been brilliant.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a real pleasure, and I've been listening to loads of the people you've been talking to. It's great. It's lovely to remember those days as well. It was a fun time.
Thanks, Astrid.
All right, Chris. Thank you.
So that was Astrid talking about Goya Dress and all her solo material and writing process, and really looking forward to hearing the new album next year, and hopefully getting to see Astrid play live. If you haven't heard any of her solo material, I've put a link to her website in the show notes. Please do check it out. It's absolutely sublime. So just some reminders of how you can support the podcast. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to support me financially, I've got a coffee donation link that's also in the show notes. That really helps as well. And lastly, if you haven't rated and reviewed the podcast, if you could do that, that would be fantastic. That's it for this week. I'm pleased to say that I've got some more interviews lined up for the next few weeks. So all being well, I'll be back in your ears at some point next weekend. Have a great week. See you soon.